You do not feel particularly stressed. That is what you would say if someone asked. You are managing. You are coping. Life is busy, but you are holding it together. You are fine. And that is exactly what makes what I'm about to tell you so important. Because the most dangerous form of stress is not the kind that breaks you visibly. It is not the kind that sends you to the emergency room or collapses you in the middle of the day. It is the kind that feels like normal. The kind that has been running so consistently for so long that your nervous system stopped registering it as stress and started registering it as just the way things are. The background hum of deadlines and money worries and relationship friction and the relentless pace of modern life that you have simply adapted to, normalized, absorbed. And while you adapted to it, your body did not. Your body has been responding to that background hum with the same biological emergency response it would deploy if your life were in immediate physical danger, every single day, for months, possibly for years. And the damage that response creates to your heart, to your brain, to your immune system, to your gut, to your hormones, to your cellular aging is measurable, documented, and in most cases completely invisible until the moment it is not. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what has been happening inside your body during every stressed week, every anxious month, every year of running on adrenaline and cortisol and telling yourself you are fine. And more importantly, because this channel is never just about the problem, you will know the specific evidence-based steps that measurably reverse the damage, not manage it, reverse it at the cellular level. But first, you need to understand what you are actually dealing with, because stress is one of the most misunderstood words in modern medicine, and the misunderstanding is costing people their lives. Stay with me. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a lion and your inbox. That is not a metaphor. That is neuroscience. Your threat detection system, the amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure deep in your brain, evolved over millions of years to detect danger and trigger a survival response before your conscious mind has time to evaluate the situation. Speed was everything. The animal that stopped to think about whether the rustling in the grass was a predator did not survive long enough to pass on its genes. So your amygdala does not think, it reacts. It scans your environment continuously, processing sensory information for threat signals, and the moment it detects something it interprets as dangerous, it fires a cascade of hormonal signals that transforms your entire physiology in seconds. Heart rate accelerates, blood pressure rises, glucose floods your bloodstream, digestion pauses, immune function downregulates, blood is redirected from your organs to your muscles. Your body becomes, in an instant, a machine optimized for one purpose: survive the next 30 seconds. This is the fight or flight response, and for the vast majority of human history, it was perfectly calibrated for the threats humans actually faced. Acute, physical, resolved quickly. Either you escaped or you did not. The stress response fired, the threat resolved, and your body returned to baseline. Cortisol cleared from your bloodstream, heart rate dropped, digestion resumed, the system reset, and waited for the next genuine emergency. Now, here is the problem. Your amygdala cannot distinguish between a predator and a performance review, between physical danger and financial pressure, between being chased and being late. It processes the thought of a difficult conversation with the same threat response it would deploy for a physical attack. It processes a notification from your bank with the same hormonal cascade it would use for genuine mortal danger. And because modern life is a continuous stream of low-grade psychological threats, none of them physically dangerous, all of them amygdala activating, your stress response never fully resets. You are not experiencing stress occasionally. You are experiencing a biological emergency response that was designed to last 30 seconds, running continuously, day after day, year after year. And your body is paying the price of that in ways that most doctors will never look for, and most people will never connect to stress until it is far too late. Chronic stress is not feeling overwhelmed. Chronic stress is a state of sustained physiological emergency, and the first organ that pays the price is the one beating in your chest right now. Your heart beats approximately 100,000 times per day. Every single beat is influenced by your nervous system, specifically by the balance between your sympathetic nervous system, which accelerates and intensifies cardiac activity, and your parasympathetic nervous system, which slows and calms it. Under healthy conditions, these two systems work in dynamic balance, your heart rate rising and falling responsively throughout the day in a pattern called heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is one of the most powerful predictors of cardiovascular health ever identified. High variability, meaning your heart rate rises and falls fluidly and responsively, indicates a healthy, adaptable cardiovascular system. Low variability, meaning your heart rate stays relatively fixed and unresponsive, indicates a nervous system under chronic stress and predicts significantly elevated risk of heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular death. Chronic stress suppresses heart rate variability, measurably, consistently, across dozens of independent studies. The mechanism is straightforward. Chronic cortisol elevation keeps your sympathetic nervous system in a state of sustained activation, overriding the parasympathetic calming signals that would otherwise allow your heart rate to vary naturally. Your heart loses its flexibility. It locks into a higher, less variable rhythm, and over years, that rigidity takes an enormous toll. But the cardiovascular damage of chronic stress goes beyond heart rate variability. Cortisol directly damages the endothelium, the thin cellular lining of your blood vessels. Healthy endothelium is smooth and flexible, allowing blood to flow freely. Cortisol-damaged endothelium becomes inflamed and roughened, creating the conditions for arterial plaque to form and accumulate. This is the beginning of atherosclerosis, the progressive narrowing of arteries that leads to heart attack and stroke. Chronic stress also raises baseline blood pressure, not dramatically, not in ways that will necessarily alarm your doctor at a single reading, but persistently and cumulatively over years. The research is unambiguous that people with chronically elevated psychological stress have significantly higher rates of hypertension, heart attack, and stroke than their less stressed counterparts, independent of every other risk factor, not instead of diet and exercise and genetics, in addition to all of them. There is a medical syndrome called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, also known as broken heart syndrome, in which severe acute psychological stress causes the left ventricle of the heart to change shape and temporarily malfunction, producing symptoms clinically indistinguishable from a heart attack. The heart literally deforms under extreme stress, not metaphorically, physically. This happens to real people in hospital emergency departments around the world every single day. That is what acute extreme stress does to a heart in hours. Imagine what moderate chronic stress does to a heart over years. Your cardiologist is looking at your cholesterol, your blood pressure, your resting heart rate, all important, but none of them capture what is happening to your cardiovascular system under the sustained hormonal pressure of chronic stress, and none of the standard interventions address it. Your immune system is supposed to be your body's standing army, a sophisticated, multi-layered defense network capable of identifying and destroying pathogens, cancer cells, and damaged tissue with extraordinary precision. When it is working properly, it operates largely invisibly. You get exposed to viruses and bacteria constantly, and your immune system neutralizes most of them before you ever feel a symptom. Chronic stress dismantles this army with remarkable efficiency. The mechanism begins with cortisol's relationship to immune function. In the short term, cortisol is actually anti-inflammatory. One of the reasons corticosteroid medications, which mimic cortisol's effects, are used to suppress immune overreaction in conditions like allergies and autoimmune disease. A brief cortisol spike suppresses inflammation rapidly, useful in a genuine emergency where inflammatory immune activity would slow you down. But under chronic stress, where cortisol is elevated not for minutes, but for weeks and months and years, something different happens. Your immune cells exposed to cortisol continuously become desensitized to its signal, the same receptor downregulation process we discussed with insulin and leptin in our last video. They stop responding to cortisol's anti-inflammatory instructions, and a chronically stressed immune system that has lost its sensitivity to cortisol's regulation does something deeply counterproductive. It becomes simultaneously overactive and under-effective. Overactive in terms of systemic inflammation, the low-grade whole-body inflammatory state that we know is a root driver of heart disease, diabetes, dementia, and cancer. Chronically stressed individuals consistently show elevated inflammatory markers, C-reactive protein, interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, the biological fingerprints of an immune system stuck in a low-level alarm state that it cannot turn off. Under-effective in terms of targeted pathogen defense. The research is striking. Students show measurably suppressed immune responses to vaccines during exam periods compared to the same vaccines administered during lower stress periods. Wound healing slows dramatically under chronic stress. Surgical wounds in chronically stressed patients heal measurably more slowly than the same wounds in less stressed patients. Viral illnesses last longer. Bacterial infections are more severe. The most alarming dimension of stress-immune interaction involves cancer surveillance. Your immune system performs continuous cancer surveillance, identifying and destroying abnormal cells before they can develop into tumors. This process requires precisely calibrated immune function. Chronic stress impairs this surveillance through multiple mechanisms, reducing natural killer cell activity, impairing T-cell function, and creating the inflammatory environment that actually promotes tumor growth. The research connecting chronic psychological stress to cancer progression, not causation of cancer, but acceleration of its progression once initiated, is among the most sobering in modern oncology. Stress does not give you cancer, but it may significantly impair your body's ability to find and destroy it before it becomes a problem. And your standard annual physical will not check any of this. It will not measure your inflammatory markers. It will not assess your immune function. It will not connect your work stress to your recurring colds, your slow healing, your elevated CRP. It will check your cholesterol and tell you that you are fine. In 2012, a research team at Yale University published a study that should have made international headlines. Using MRI brain imaging, they demonstrated that individuals with high chronic life stress showed measurable reduction in gray matter volume in the prefrontal cortex, the region of your brain responsible for decision-making, emotional regulation, impulse control, and rational thought. Your brain was physically smaller under chronic stress, not metaphorically impaired, measurably, structurally reduced. The mechanism involves a molecule called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, sometimes described as fertilizer for your brain. BDNF promotes the growth of new neurons, maintains existing neural connections, and supports the brain's ability to reorganize and adapt, a capacity called neuroplasticity. Chronic cortisol elevation directly suppresses BDNF production. Less BDNF means less new neuron growth, weaker existing connections, and reduced neuroplasticity. Under sustained stress, your brain is literally losing structural integrity. The hippocampus, your brain's memory formation and consolidation center, is particularly vulnerable. It has an exceptionally high concentration of cortisol receptors, which made evolutionary sense when cortisol spikes were brief and the memory enhancement that acute stress produces was useful for survival. Remember where the predator was. Remember what almost killed you. Acute cortisol enhances memory formation. Chronic cortisol does the opposite. Sustained cortisol elevation damages hippocampal neurons directly. Hippocampal volume reduction in chronically stressed individuals has been documented across dozens of imaging studies. People with chronic stress, PTSD, and chronic depression, all conditions involving sustained cortisol elevation, consistently show smaller hippocampi than their unstressed counterparts. And smaller hippocampi mean impaired memory formation, slower recall, and greater vulnerability to age-related cognitive decline. Here is the detail that should alarm you most. The hippocampus is one of the primary sites of early Alzheimer's disease pathology. The hippocampal damage that begins under decades of chronic stress is not identical to Alzheimer's, but it creates conditions of vulnerability, of neural fragility that may significantly accelerate the progression of neurodegenerative disease in people who are genetically susceptible. The brain fog you experience during high stress periods, the forgetfulness, the inability to concentrate, the emotional reactivity that surprises you, the decisions you make under pressure that you would never make calm. These are not personality traits. They are not signs of weakness or aging or diminished capability. They are the measurable neurological consequences of a brain operating under sustained cortisol pressure. And they are reversible if the pressure is addressed before the damage becomes structural. This is one of the most important sentences in this video. The brain damage of chronic stress is largely reversible if caught in time. Hippocampal volume can be restored, BDNF can be stimulated, neural connections can be rebuilt. The brain's neuroplasticity, its ability to physically reorganize and repair, remains remarkable even under significant prior damage, but it requires the right interventions, and it requires them before the structural changes become too advanced. If you watched our first video on sleep, you already know that your gut contains 500 million neurons and produces 90% of your body's serotonin. You already know that your gut and your brain are in continuous communication through the vagus nerve, and that gut health directly determines sleep quality through serotonin and melatonin production. What that video did not cover is what chronic stress does to this system, and it is catastrophic. Your gut lining is one of the most remarkable biological structures in your body. A single cell layer thick, thinner than a human hair, it performs the extraordinary task of selectively absorbing nutrients from everything you eat while keeping bacteria, undigested food particles, and toxins contained within your digestive tract. It is simultaneously a gateway and a barrier, and its ability to function as both depends entirely on the tight junctions between its cells remaining intact. Chronic stress destroys these tight junctions. Cortisol and the other stress hormones directly increase intestinal permeability, a condition the research community calls increased gut permeability, and that popular health media calls leaky gut. When the tight junctions between gut lining cells are compromised, bacterial fragments, undigested food particles, and lipopolysaccharides, highly inflammatory molecules from the outer membrane of gut bacteria, enter your bloodstream directly. Your immune system, encountering these foreign substances in places they should never be, mounts an inflammatory response. Not a localized one, a systemic one. Whole body inflammation that drives the same elevated inflammatory markers we discussed in the immune section, CRP, interleukin-6, TNF-alpha, but now being driven by your own gut bacteria leaking into your circulation. This is one of the primary mechanisms connecting chronic stress to virtually every chronic disease simultaneously. The stress compromises the gut barrier. The compromised gut barrier drives inflammation, which damages the brain, which impairs emotional regulation, which generates more psychological stress, which elevates cortisol further. Cardiovascular stress impairs sleep, which worsens cortisol rhythms, which worsens gut permeability, which worsens immune function. It is not a list of separate problems. It is one interconnected biological crisis running simultaneously across every system in your body. And the most terrifying dimension of all of this is coming next, because what I have described so far is what chronic stress does to people who feel stressed. What happens to people who no longer feel it at all is far more dangerous. Here is the twist. The people most at risk from chronic stress-related illness are not the people who feel overwhelmed. They are the people who adapted. Human beings have a remarkable and, in this context, deeply dangerous capacity for hedonic adaptation, the psychological process by which we normalize our circumstances regardless of their objective quality. A person who has been under chronic stress for 5 years does not feel 5 years' worth of accumulated stress. They feel normal because their nervous system recalibrated its baseline around the stress state. What would have felt unbearable in year 1 feels simply like Tuesday in year 5. But the body's stress response does not adapt the way the mind does. The cardiovascular damage keeps accumulating. The gut permeability keeps progressing. The hippocampal volume keeps declining. The inflammatory markers keep rising. The cellular aging keeps accelerating. The biology does not normalize to chronic stress. It just gets progressively more damaged while the person it belongs to feels increasingly fine. This is why the research on stress and mortality produces numbers that seem impossible. A landmark study published in Health Psychology followed over 28,000 adults for 8 years and found that people who reported high levels of stress and believed stress was harmful to their health had a 43% increased risk of premature death. But here's the detail almost nobody discusses. People who reported high levels of stress but did not believe it was harming them showed no increased mortality risk at all. The perception of stress as harmless does not make the biological damage harmless, but it does suggest something profound about the role of awareness in stress physiology. People who recognize what is happening in their bodies and respond to it, who treat their stress response as a biological signal requiring attention rather than a psychological weakness requiring suppression, show measurably different health outcomes. The most dangerous relationship with chronic stress is the one where you are too adapted to notice it, too busy to address it, and too committed to the identity of someone who copes well to acknowledge that coping is not the same as thriving, that the absence of visible breakdown is not the same as the absence of biological damage. Your body has been keeping score, even when you are not paying attention. The score exists whether you look at it or not, and looking at it, really looking, with the right tests, the right awareness, the right interventions, is the most important health decision you can make. Your annual physical will not find this. Not because your doctor is negligent, but because standard care was not designed to detect the biological consequences of chronic stress. It was designed to detect disease after it has already manifested. Elevated blood pressure, elevated cholesterol, elevated blood glucose. All of these are downstream consequences of years of stress damage. They appear at the end of the process. Standard care finds them there. What you need are the markers that appear upstream, before the disease, while the trajectory is still fully reversible. Request a high-sensitivity C-reactive protein test, HSCRP. This measures systemic inflammation directly. A healthy HSCRP is below 1 milligram per liter. Above 3 indicates significant chronic inflammation with meaningfully elevated cardiovascular and disease risk. Most people with chronic stress-driven inflammation have no idea their HSCRP is elevated because it is not on a standard panel and nobody ordered it. Request cortisol testing. Ideally, a 4-point salivary cortisol test measuring levels at waking, noon, evening, and bedtime, which reveals the shape of your entire cortisol rhythm across the day, not just a single snapshot. A healthy cortisol pattern shows a strong morning peak and a gradual decline through the day to low levels at night. Chronic stress produces a flattened rhythm, elevated evening cortisol, or in advanced adrenal fatigue, a suppressed flat pattern throughout. Each pattern has different implications and different interventions. Request heart rate variability assessment. Many modern wearables measure this continuously, but a formal HRV assessment by a cardiologist provides more clinically meaningful data. Low HRV is an independent predictor of cardiovascular events and a direct marker of chronic autonomic nervous system stress. Request DHEA-S alongside cortisol. DHEA is a hormone produced by the same adrenal glands that produce cortisol, and it functions as cortisol's biological counterbalance, the anabolic repair-promoting hormone that chronic stress progressively depletes. A low cortisol to DHEA ratio is one of the clearest biological signatures of chronic stress damage and one of the most actionable. DHEA restoration is straightforward and measurably improves stress resilience. Request homocysteine. This amino acid, produced as a metabolite of protein digestion, rises under chronic stress and chronic B vitamin deficiency and is a direct marker of cardiovascular and neurological risk that most doctors never check. Elevated homocysteine is independently associated with heart attack, stroke, and accelerated cognitive decline. These 5 tests, HSCRP, cortisol rhythm, HRV, DHEA-S, homocysteine, give you a complete biological portrait of your chronic stress burden that no standard checkup will ever provide. Use those exact names. Your doctor may not offer them automatically. You have to ask. And knowing these numbers is the difference between managing symptoms and understanding the actual territory of what is happening in your body. Here is what you actually do. Not what the industry sells you, what the biology requires. First, fix your insulin. Remove refined carbohydrates and added sugars from your daily eating. Not forever necessarily, for 8 weeks initially while your insulin sensitivity begins to restore. Replace them with protein, healthy fats, and vegetables. Protein is the most metabolically active macronutrient. Your body burns approximately 25% of the calories in protein just digesting it. It produces the most sustained satiety. It protects muscle tissue during fat loss. Make it the foundation of every meal. Specifically, eat within a 10 to 12 hour window each day. Finish your last meal at least 3 hours before bed, which also addresses the blood sugar crashes from our sleep video. This gives your insulin enough time to fall low enough each night for genuine fat oxidation to occur during sleep. Your body does significant fat burning work overnight when insulin is low. Most people are interrupting this process with late meals and late snacks without knowing it. Second, fix your cortisol. The morning light protocol from our sleep video directly applies here. Morning light exposure restores cortisol rhythms, meaning cortisol spikes when it should in the morning and falls when it should in the evening. A dysregulated cortisol pattern that stays elevated in the evening is directly sabotaging your overnight fat burning. 10 minutes of morning sunlight without sunglasses is simultaneously a sleep intervention and a fat loss intervention. Manage active stress, not with generic advice to relax, but with the specific understanding that cortisol is physically preventing fat release. Whatever reduces your stress response, walking in nature, cold exposure, breath work, genuine social connection, is a fat loss tool, not a luxury, a biological requirement for the hormonal environment your fat cells need to release their contents. Third, build muscle. Start with 2 resistance training sessions per week, not hours, 40 minutes per session of compound movements, squats, deadlifts, rows, presses, movements that recruit multiple muscle groups simultaneously. Research shows that 2 sessions per week produce 80% of the muscle building stimulus of 5 sessions per week. 2 sessions is manageable. 2 sessions will rebuild the metabolically expensive tissue that dieting removed and permanently raise your metabolic floor. Fourth, prioritize sleep above every other fat loss strategy. The research is unambiguous. Sleep deprivation increases ghrelin. It decreases leptin. It worsens insulin sensitivity. It elevates cortisol. It preferentially causes loss of muscle rather than fat during calorie restriction. Everything else you do for fat loss is undermined by poor sleep. 8 hours is not optional. It is the foundation everything else rests on. Fifth, get the blood panel. Request fasting insulin, not just fasting glucose. Most doctors check glucose, not insulin, which means insulin resistance goes undiagnosed until it has progressed to prediabetes. Request it by name. Fasting insulin above 10 microunits per milliliter indicates significant insulin resistance that will need specific attention. Also request HbA1c, vitamin D, and ferritin because the deficiencies we covered in our sleep video directly worsen insulin sensitivity and fat metabolism. You cannot fix what you cannot see. Get the map first, then choose your interventions with the actual territory in front of you. Here is what I need you to sit with before you close this video. You live in a world that treats stress as a badge, that equates busyness with importance and exhaustion with dedication, that normalizes the biological emergency response as a personality trait. Type A, driven, high-achieving, rather than recognizing it as a physiological state with measurable consequences for every organ in your body simultaneously. The cardiovascular damage accumulating silently in your arterial walls, the hippocampal tissue thinning over years of cortisol pressure, the gut barrier slowly becoming permeable, feeding systemic inflammation that accelerates every chronic disease simultaneously. The immune system stuck in a low-grade alarm state it cannot switch off. All of it happening quietly. All of it building. All of it completely invisible until the moment it is not. You do not get a warning. That is the cruelest part of chronic stress-related illness. Unlike acute stress, which announces itself loudly, chronic stress damage progresses silently until it reaches a threshold. A heart attack, a stroke, an autoimmune diagnosis, a cancer that should have been found earlier, a cognitive decline that arrives faster than it should have. And by the time the threshold is reached, the damage has been building for a decade or more. But here is what is also true. Your body has a remarkable capacity to heal when given what it needs. The hippocampal volume can be restored. The arterial endothelium can repair itself. The gut barrier can reseal. The inflammatory markers can drop. The cortisol rhythm can be restored. The heart rate variability can improve. These are not hopeful statements. They are documented biological outcomes from specific, targeted interventions that address the actual mechanisms rather than the surface symptoms. You are not powerless here. You are underinformed. And there is a profound difference between those two things. The morning light that costs nothing, the resistance training twice per week, the breathing practice that takes 4 minutes and directly calms your nervous system, the blood tests that will show you the actual state of your biology rather than the comfortable fiction of a normal result. These are not major lifestyle overhauls. They are precise biological interventions for a precise biological problem. And they work because they address the actual cause rather than the symptom. Your body has been keeping score through every stressed year, every sleepless night, every month of running on cortisol and telling yourself you are fine. The score exists, but scores can change. And now you have what you need to change yours. If this video gave you something, a clearer picture of what has been happening inside your body and what you can actually do about it, subscribe to this channel, because this is what we do here every single week. We take the research that exists but never reaches you, and we bring it to you clearly, completely, and in a way that you can actually use, starting today. Your body has been waiting for this information. Now you have it. I will see you in the next one.